We'll get you settled into the guest room next weekend, Mom. Just stay at the Marriott for now. The house is still a mess from moving. That's what my son told me. On the phone. 3 days after I handed him a check for $62,000. I remember sitting at the small desk in room 114, still wearing my good blouse. The cream one I'd ironed twice because I wanted to look nice when I saw the new house, and I just stared at the wall. The air conditioning hummed. The TV was off. I hadn't turned it on since I checked in. I had driven 11 hours from Asheville to be there. Packed 2 suitcases. Left behind the house I'd lived in for 31 years. And I was eating a granola bar from the vending machine at 9 o'clock at night because nobody had invited me to dinner. Let me start from where it actually begins. Because none of this came out of nowhere. Things like this never do. They grow slowly, the way mold grows behind a wall. You can't see it, but something in the air tells you it's there. My son is 34 years old. He went to NC State on a partial scholarship and worked part-time through college, and I was proud of him for that. Genuinely proud. His father passed when he was 19, a heart attack, fast and without warning, the kind that doesn't give you time to say goodbye. And after that, it was just the two of us. He finished school, got a job in logistics, met a woman named Tara at a work conference in Charlotte, and 2 years later, they got married in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Greensboro. I liked Tara well enough in the beginning. She was organized, efficient, the kind of person who sends thank you cards within 48 hours and keeps a color-coded calendar on the refrigerator. I told myself those were good qualities. I told myself I was lucky my son had found someone capable. What I didn't let myself see, not for a long time, was how she looked at me when I spoke. Like she was waiting for me to finish so she could redirect the conversation to something she considered more relevant. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My husband, before he died, had a modest life insurance policy. Not extravagant. But over the years, I'd been careful with money the way my mother taught me. Clip the coupons, drive the car until it stops. Don't buy what you can't pay cash for. And by the time I turned 63, I had saved enough that I felt, for the first time in my adult life, genuinely secure. When my son called me 2 winters ago and told me he and Tara had found the perfect house, I was happy for him. When he told me they were $40,000 short of the down payment, I told him I'd think about it. When Tara sent me a link to the Zillow listing the next morning with a little heart emoji, I understood the conversation had already been decided. I gave them $40,000. 6 months later, they needed new appliances. The kitchen hadn't been updated since the 90s, and Tara wanted a gas range and a French door refrigerator and a dishwasher that was, in her words, actually quiet. I sent $7,200. Then the HVAC went out. $8,500. My son said they'd pay me back when tax season came around. Tax season came and went. I didn't mention it. He didn't either. Then Tara's car needed work, something with the transmission, and her warranty had lapsed by 4 months, and wasn't that just terrible timing? She didn't ask me directly. She mentioned it to my son while I was on the phone with him, loud enough for me to hear. I sent $2,200. I want to be honest with you about something. And this is the part I have the hardest time saying out loud. I knew what I was doing. Some part of me knew. But there's a particular kind of loneliness that sets in when you're a widow living alone in a house that used to have another person's in it, and the only family you have left is 400 miles away. And you think, if I can just be useful, if I can just be needed, maybe they'll want me around. That's an embarrassing thing to admit. I'm 66 years old. I have a college degree. I worked as a hospital administrator for 22 years. I know better. And yet, I sold the Asheville house in March. The market was good, and the house had appreciated more than I expected. And after everything was settled, I had enough to buy something modest near my son, and still have money left. That was the plan. Move closer, find a small place, be part of their lives before I got too old to drive or travel or be of any use to anyone. I told my son in January that I was thinking of selling. He said, "That's great, Mom. We'd love to have you closer." Tara got on the phone and said they had a guest room, and I was welcome anytime. I should have asked more questions. I should have said, "When you say anytime, what exactly do you mean?" But I didn't, because when your child tells you they want you nearby, you don't interrogate it. You just feel the warmth of it and let yourself believe it. The house sold in 11 days. I was out by the end of February. I drove to Winston-Salem on a Tuesday. I had called ahead, told my son I'd be arriving around 4. He said perfect. Tara was home, they'd see me soon. He sounded happy. Or at least, he sounded normal. I've spent a lot of time since then trying to remember if there was something in his voice I missed. Some hesitation, some flatness. I don't think I missed anything. I think he meant it when he said it. I pulled into the driveway at 417. The house was nice. A brick colonial with black shutters and a Japanese maple in the front yard that was just starting to bud. I had seen pictures, but pictures never capture the feeling of a place. I sat in my car for a moment and thought, this is going to be okay. This is a new chapter. Tara answered the door in workout clothes. She looked surprised to see me, which I thought was strange, and then I understood it was because she had forgotten I was coming. She smiled quickly and said, "Oh, you made it. Come in, like I was a package that had arrived on an unexpected day. The house smelled like a candle. Something expensive, probably a brand I'd never heard of. It was clean in the way that tells you no children live there, everything arranged at a deliberate angle. I noticed my son's golf shoes by the door and felt a small stab of something. Normalcy. This was his normal life. I wanted to be part of it. We sat in the kitchen and Tara made tea I didn't ask for, and we talked about the drive, the weather, how the Japanese maple had really come in this spring. My son came home around 6. He hugged me, and the hug was real. I still believe that. And he asked about my back, because I'd had some trouble with it last summer, and I thought, this is fine. This is still my son. Over dinner, they told me they'd been meaning to talk to me about the guest room situation. The guest room, Tara explained, was currently being used as her home office. She'd started a consulting business 8 months ago, something in brand strategy. I never quite understood the specifics, and the room had her desk and equipment and client files, and she needed it to be a proper workspace. She said they'd been planning to set up something in the basement, a more private space for me, actually, more independent. Wasn't that better? My son nodded, said I'd have my own entrance, said it would feel like my own little apartment. I asked when that would be ready. My son looked at Tara. Tara looked at her tea. We're thinking maybe by the fall, she said. It was April. That night, my son booked me a room at the Marriott 2 miles away. He paid for it himself, which I will say in his favor. He walked me to my car and said, "Just for a few weeks, Mom, while we get things sorted." He seemed genuinely uncomfortable. I held on to that. But a few weeks became a month became 6 weeks. I was living out of a hotel room, eating breakfast from a paper bag, paying for parking and laundry, and the occasional dinner at a Panera because I couldn't eat another granola bar. My son would text most days. They'd have me over for dinner sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. Tara was always pleasant. Deliberately, carefully pleasant in the way that makes you feel more unwelcome than outright coldness would. I tried to visit more, stop by on a Saturday morning with coffee and muffins. My son would seem happy to see me. Tara would appear from somewhere in the back of the house and say she had calls that afternoon, or she was behind on a deadline, or she wasn't feeling great. The message was always the same even when the words changed. One afternoon I arrived and heard them before I knocked. Not fighting, just talking. And I heard Tara say, clearly, without particular emotion, "She's here again." Just that. She's here again. Like I was an inconvenience, like I was a problem to be managed. I stood on that front porch for a moment and made myself breathe. Then I turned around and walked back to my car. I drove to a park a few blocks away and sat for a long time. It was a Wednesday. The park was mostly empty. A few mothers with strollers, a man walking a dog. I watched the dog for a while because dogs don't have complicated feelings about who belongs. That's when I called my friend from Asheville. Her name is Jocelyn, and we've been friends since our daughters were in the same preschool class nearly 30 years ago. Jocelyn has always been the kind of person who tells you what you need to hear, even when what you need to hear is hard. I told her everything. The money, the hotel, the guest room that was somehow always 3 months from being ready, what I'd heard on the porch. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Honey, when did you last talk to a lawyer?" I said. "About what?" she said. "About any of it." That was the beginning of the real turn. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just a question from a friend that opened a door I hadn't known was there. I went back to the hotel, and I sat with a legal pad, and I wrote down every amount of money I had given my son and Tara since the wedding. Not from memory alone. I keep records, the way my mother taught me, every transaction noted in a small ledger I've kept for 40 years. I added it up twice because I didn't trust the first number. 62,000 for the down payment, 7,200 for appliances, 8,500 for the HVAC, 2,200 for Tara's car repair, 11,000 for my son's dental work 2 years ago, a crown and 2 root canals his insurance didn't cover, 4,500 for the fence they'd put in last summer because the HOA had cited them, $94,400. I stared at that number for a long time. I want to be careful here because I'm not telling this story to be cruel to my son. I love him. I have loved him since the moment they put him in my arms 34 years ago and he looked up at me with those dark eyes that were already so much his father's. That love doesn't go away. It doesn't even diminish, really. It just shifts. Rearranges itself around what you now know to be true. What I know to be true is this. I had given nearly $100,000 to 2 people who were charging me for a parking space in their lives. I called a financial advisor I'd worked with for years. His name is Ted. Not on the list, and he told me plainly that if I didn't stop, I'd be spending my 70s working a part-time job to cover my own prescriptions. I had a retirement account. I had some savings from the house, but I had also been quietly funding a life that wasn't mine, and that had a cost. I called an attorney, not about suing anyone, just to understand where I stood. She was a small woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she listened to everything I said without interrupting. And when I finished, she said, "What outcome are you hoping for?" I said, "I want my son back." She looked at me gently. "And the money?" I said. "I want my son to understand what the money meant." That distinction mattered to me. I wasn't after the money. I was after the understanding. Not as a resource, not as a problem, but as his mother, as his who had loved him his entire life and was still here. I wrote him a letter. I have always been better on paper than in person, more precise, less likely to cry, and lose the thread of what I'm trying to say. I wrote 4 drafts over 2 days. The final one was 3 pages, handwritten, because I wanted him to feel the weight of it. Ink on paper, my actual handwriting, not a text that could be screenshot and forwarded. I told him about the ledger. I told him I was not angry, but I was finished, pretending the dynamic between us was normal. I told him that I had sold my home and driven 400 miles because I wanted to be near my family. And instead I was living in a hotel room eating vending machine food, while his wife used the space that was supposed to be mine to store her client files. I told him I was going home. Not Asheville, that was gone, but somewhere that was mine. I had found a small apartment in Brevard, a town I had always loved, about 40 minutes from Asheville. It was enough space. It had a little porch. It was not the home I had imagined for this chapter of my life, but it was a home, and it would be mine. I told him I would always be his mother. I told him I loved him. I told him I hoped he would think about the kind of son he wanted to be. Not because I was threatening him with anything, but because those questions matter, and no one was asking them. I left the letter in an envelope on the kitchen counter the following morning while he was at work. Tara was home, in her office. She heard me come in. I had a key and didn't come out. I set the letter down, took my key off my keychain, and left it beside the envelope. Then I drove to pick up a moving pod I'd arranged the previous week. I had not told my son. I had arranged all of it quietly over 3 weeks while he thought I was still waiting for the basement to be finished. I will not pretend that didn't hurt to do. There's something that costs you something deep when you have to outsmart your own child just to protect yourself. He called me that evening. I let it ring. He texted, "Mom, I got your letter. Can we talk?" I texted back, "Yes, give me a few days." I needed those days. I needed to be somewhere that was mine before I could talk to him calmly. I needed to not be in a hotel room when I had the conversation that was going to shape whatever came next. I moved into the Brevard apartment on a Saturday in late May. Jocelyn drove down from Asheville to help me unpack. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor among the boxes, and she didn't make me talk about my son unless I wanted to. I wanted to, a little. I told her I was scared. She said that was reasonable. I told her I didn't know if I'd done the right thing. She said, "You know what the wrong thing would have been. That's enough to go on." I called my son on a Sunday 10 days later. He answered on the first ring. He started with, "I'm sorry," and I let him say it, and I could tell from his voice that he meant it. At least partially, in the way people mean apologies when they've been caught in the shape of something they didn't think they were doing. He said he hadn't realized how bad it had gotten. He said Tara hadn't realized either. He said they wanted to make it right. I told him I was glad to hear that. I told him I would need some time to trust that. Not forever, just time. Then I said something I had been practicing for days, because I wanted to say it right. I don't need you to repay me the money. What I need is for you to understand what it means when someone gives you everything they have and you make them feel like a visitor. Your father would have been very clear with you about that, and since he can't be, I'm being clear with you now. There was a long pause. Then my son said, quietly, I know, Mom. I don't know what comes next. I want to be honest about that. We have talked 3 times since then. The conversations are careful, the way conversations are when everyone is aware they're standing on ground that recently shifted. Tara has not called me. I haven't called her. That's a separate conversation for a separate day, and I am not going to rush it. What I know is this. I wake up in my own apartment. I make my own coffee. I sit on my porch and watch the light come through the trees, and I do not wait for anyone to tell me I'm allowed to be there. Some mornings that's enough. Some mornings it's more than enough. My son sent me a card last week. A real card, the kind you buy in a drugstore, with a stamp. He had written inside it in his own handwriting, I see you, Mom. I'm working on it. I put it on the windowsill in my kitchen where I can see it when I'm doing the dishes. I haven't written back yet, but I will.